I'm Dan Meyer, publisher of BizTimes Milwaukee and BizTimes.com. Welcome to the Manufacturing Summit, this first day of Manufacturing Month. So here to introduce our panelists is Steve Jagler, Executive Editor of BizTimes.
Almost on cue, Buckley mentioned the U.S. Department of Commerce. The department came out with a report this week that said the U.S. manufacturing sector has added more than 700,000 jobs over the last 4.5 years and is growing at twice the rate of the GDP. Manufacturing supports 17.4 million U.S. jobs. The average salary of manufacturing workers is $77,000. For every $1 spent on manufacturing, the sector creates $1.32 for the U.S. economy. So it continues, as you know, to be an important staple of the U.S. and especially the Wisconsin economy. So we're here to explore the latest, greatest trends in all this. And to do that, I want to call up our panelists. Could you make your way to the front here? Thank you so much for being a part of this. You all come at this from a different perspective in terms of what you do. Paul, you're the CEO at Allen Edmonds. Give us the 30-second elevator speech. I think we all know what Allen Edmonds makes, but bring us up to date. How are things going after the private equity sale?
Sure. It's great to be here, Steve. Thanks for inviting me. And I want to start by thanking all the people in the room for the great support Allen Edmonds gets from Wisconsin. I see a tremendous number of our shoes here. My friends can't stand how much I notice people's shoes, but I got news for you guys. Women notice men's shoes way more than biceps and cars. So for a couple of you guys who are near me over there, you ought to look at your shoes and think about that a little bit. So the news, Allen Edmonds was sold last year to a second private equity firm. The first one bought from John Stolenwerk, who was mentioned earlier on, in 2006, and now we're owned by a firm called Brentwood Associates out of Southern California. They're consumer products and retailing experts, and they're bringing a lot of value to our company already, and it's a very good partnership for us. We opened our 53rd store just last week in Buckhead in Atlanta. We now have 53 stores open. We've taken our approach that we've used here in Milwaukee for a long time of going directly to the customer around the country now, and we're coast to coast, border to border with our own stores and our own e-commerce site, which is now in the neighborhood of about $30 million worth of revenue. So it's quite a big business for us. Our biggest customer on the wholesale side remains Nordstrom, which is actually up significantly as we've been able to build the brand. Our business in our best wholesale accounts has also been growing. So opening our own stores, much to the surprise of many of our dealers, has actually helped build their business as opposed to taking business away from them. So lots of good things going on at Allen Edmonds. As we spread, I guess the main thing to talk about also is this transition from just your business suit shoe to a 7-day-a-week shoe, including on the golf course. So we've got a lot going on.
Outstanding. Frank, tell us about Stratec. What do you make, and how are things going?
Well, they were going pretty well until a few minutes ago. I'm devastated. I'm in the auto business, and to hear shoes trump auto, it's doing me in. I'm just beside myself.
And you got nice shoes on.
Yeah, they are. Stratec was really the original part of Briggs & Stratton, founded 106 years ago. Briggs started out in the automotive business and added engines along the way. And in 1995, Briggs decided that there really wasn't much synergy between the automotive parts business and the engine business, and they spun us off as a separate publicly traded company. So we dominated the automotive lock and key business. We had probably 60 to 80% market share in North America for the last 100 years. We knew we needed to diversify, so we've added other products like latches and door handles, all the kind of things that people just want to corner me at cocktail parties and talk about. They're fabulous products. And so not only have we diversified in terms of automotive products, we've diversified geographically, so we are now in a global partnership where we own facilities in China, and we partner with companies in Germany, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, and Mexico. Stratec itself has about $350 million in sales as part of the partnership, which we call VAST. We're about $1.2 billion. Stratec has about 4,000 employees, 400 in Milwaukee, about 3,000 in Mexico, and 1,000 in China. We've since recently started to diversify our business. So we bought a company called Nexlock in fingerprint technology. So we're in a much broader security market that will get us into residential, commercial, and apply in the automotive business. And we've taken some of our skill sets and turned them into businesses like our Component Solutions division, which now does precision die casting and plating for people in the area. So that's what Stratec does.
All right, we've got a shoe guy and a lock guy. Awesome, what do you do?
I'm the guy that wore the wrong shoes this morning. I can't believe it. I've got a couple pairs of Allen Edmonds, and somehow I woke up and didn't put them on this morning. So, Paul, I apologize. So I'm Austin Ramirez from Husco International. I'm the second generation of Ramirez family leadership at Husco, and we're lucky enough to have my dad here in the audience. Gus bought Husco in 1985, and I came back about 10 years ago, and I've been CEO for about 3.5. We make highly engineered hydraulic components for construction equipment, so think folks like John Deere and Caterpillar, and passenger cars. So we make engine and transmission components and sell to the big OEMs like Ford and Chrysler and GM, as well as to some of the big tier ones like BorgWarner. We do about half our business overseas. We've got wholly owned manufacturing facilities in China and India and Europe. We've got offices in Korea and Brazil and Germany. Both those industries are pretty highly cyclical. So one of the things, the dynamics that we've been wrestling with is we really got hit hard in the recession in 2008, and we've had a terrific growth wave since then, despite some headwinds in the global economy that are still challenging for us. But I think I'll stop there and answer more questions as we go on.
Great. Welcome. And Catherine, you're our representative of FAB, the food and beverage industry, on the panel. Tell us the elevator story of Gale Foods.
Great. So Gale Foods is a low-acid aseptic food manufacturer. That means that we make foods that are shelf-stable, and we're in the dairy food business, which is good for Wisconsin. And we make cheese sauce, pudding, and nutritional beverages, and they are sold throughout North America and a little bit in Europe and Africa. And so we're very excited about what's happening at our company and look forward to talking today about the future of manufacturing. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Well, fantastic. Thank you all for taking time to join us today. I'm always reminded when we have a program on manufacturing by what Tim Sheehy at the MMAC once said at one of our events, that manufacturers add value to the regional economy. They export products. The rest of us are just washing each other's socks. I want you four to feel empowered to come in and out of the conversation. Whenever you have something to add, don't wait for my cue. The people here are here to see you, not me, and I know that. And you're the people who have the knowledge that these people are here to see. So when you have something to say, don't wait for my cue. Feel free to speak off of each other's talking points. I'd like to begin, and then we'll take questions at the end from the audience. I'd like to begin by just kind of taking the pulse of your companies as we draw near to the end of fiscal 2014. How are your balance sheets looking? How are your companies doing relative to the previous year? Are you meeting expectations? Has this been, or is this going to be, a good year in 2014 for your individual companies?
Okay. Many of you will probably remember that it was. Who's working the mics? Did I turn something off? I was saying that we'll all remember the polar vortex that started this year in January and February. And what happened in the consumer products industry and in retailing was the first shipment of spring goods ended in stores, and there was no one going out in the cold weather. So that piled up, and the big retailers need to make room for those shipments for the next shipment that would come in for Spring 2, as it's called. And so there were huge promotions to get rid of Spring 1 to try to attract customers out of the fireplace, out of sitting next to the fireplace. So it's been a highly promotional year because of that all year long. Every new wave of inventory is needed to be sold at big discounts to get customers moving. In spite of the fact that consumer confidence is high, consumer buying behavior, at least in the soft goods industry, has been quite soft all year long. Our business is up, but we've been participating in the Get Them Out of the House promotion calendar this year also, and our margins are down. So as a result, our profitability is down relative to last year. We're hoping for a big fourth quarter. Things have changed a little bit in consumer behavior, number one. Number two, we start our big Rediscover America sale this week, and that's always a huge business volume driver for us. Then, of course, heading into the holiday season, and on top of that, I mentioned earlier the value that the Brentwood Associates folks are adding. We've gotten into cataloging in a way that we've never done before, and we'll be sending out 600,000 more catalogs than we sent out last year, and that really drove a lot of our business during our anniversary sale in April. So
these are printed catalogs?
It's a printed catalog, yeah.
Interesting.
For those of you in the consumer business, we didn't know that although everybody does their shopping online, a catalog drives them to the website. So we are now buying mailing lists the way catalogers do, and we're sending out, we'll send out 3 catalogs here between right now and the end of the holiday season.
Interesting. Frank, I think you had a record quarter recently, did I read?
Yes, we had, as a public company, I can't really make projections, but I can talk about the past. And we just finished a record quarter, a record year, record profit sharing with our employees. We have an incentive system based on basically a return on assets sort of formula and an improvement formula. So we've been extremely busy on a lot of fronts. The automotive industry generally has been growing, bounced back from when you look back 5-6 years ago. We basically have three main customers, Ford, GM, and Chrysler. And when you have 2 of your 3 customers in bankruptcy, that's usually not a good situation. And it wasn't. But we've done extremely well. Our balance sheet is very strong. We've got probably $20 million in cash and no debt, and $100 million in equity. One of the things that we have talked about, though, is trying to bring some of that money into the United States, because of that $20 million, we probably have $10 to $15 million in Mexico that we're using to reinvest in Mexico. In fact, we just bought another plant last month, but trying to bring that back into the States and pay the penalty of double taxation doesn't make a lot of sense. So when we talk about policies on what could really be a huge shot of adrenaline in the economy, would be government basically relaxing that. They don't even have to get rid of it totally, but relax it a little bit, and I think that would have a huge impact on what people would do in terms of reinvestment here.
I definitely want to follow up with that a little later in our program on Mexico and onshoring and public policies. I I definitely want to find out more about that. Austin, how's your year looking at Husco?
Yeah, sure. So the good news is we're going to have a third consecutive record year this year, top and bottom line. So, and our balance sheet is in terrific shape. Now,
What's driving that growth?
well, the automotive industry in the U.S. has been fantastic. I mean, it's really recovered to nearly pre-recession levels of demand.
It makes us look smart.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I had the benefit of some good timing when I took over, right after the worst and as it was starting to pick up. And in the automotive sector, we do all fuel efficiency related products. So outside of the growth in the industry, the sort of products that we make are just being proliferated across more and more car platforms. So that's been a great driver of growth. The challenge is, as I look around the world, and we do about half our business overseas, it's tough sledding everywhere. I mean, Europe continues to be a mess. China, particularly on the construction side, not as much in automotive, but the construction market in China is down 30-40% from the peak it had 3 years ago. Brazil is weak. India just elected a new prime minister. There was lots of optimism that the market there was going to turn around. It continues to be very weak. And even in the U.S., outside of the automotive sector, new home starts are still nowhere near where they were before the recession hits, and that's a big driver of our business. So, we're performing well, we're having record years, but I look around the world, and there's not a whole lot of bright spots that has me excited about economic growth going into next year.
Catherine, how's your company doing?
We started transforming our company about 5 years ago to really match the demand, the pace, the flexibility that's demanded in today's food manufacturing environment, because customers that we sell are phenomenally more demanding, as they have a right to be, than they were 10 years ago. So it's a much more highly competitive industry than we were competing in for the first of our 120 years, the first 110 of those, 120. And so we've been changing our company. We've really focused first on how do we improve the bottom line, how do we improve our operational effectiveness, how do we make sure that we can meet the demand when we start to grow it. So we expect in 2015 to start growing our top line as much as we've been growing our bottom line. And then when we put those two together, that's going to be a pretty powerful combination. So having said that, we expect in the future to see a reasonable amount of pricing pressure in the food industry because of the economic issues that you guys have mentioned, which is as the U.S. struggles competitively worldwide, and as jobs don't grow and income doesn't grow in the United States, then that puts pressure on food prices, which will also affect companies like ours. Even if we're not doing business globally, we're affected by the U.S. position relative to global competition.
I should mention that each of the four shared their projections for the year ahead in the current edition of our magazine, and you can go into more details about that. That U.S. Commerce Department report I mentioned before said that 70% of Americans view manufacturing as the most important industry for a strong economy, but only 30% of parents encourage their kids to enter manufacturing as a career. Why is that, and what can we do to change that?
I think industry has done a lousy job of explaining what we're doing. When I look at the exposure that both the students and the teachers have to what's going on in industry, it is not dark. We put away the supervisors that put away the whips, many years ago. It's not back-breaking work. We need high skills. There's some real satisfaction of getting done with the end of the day and physically seeing a product that you can be proud of. There's some more satisfaction to certain people with that than coming up with a new report on or something like that. So I think we've done a lousy job of inviting teachers and students in to see what we're doing, to see the opportunities that are available, and they're not necessarily low-paying jobs. They're really significant paying jobs with some nice upside opportunity, but I don't think we've focused as a industry, a manufacturing industry, to really give people that exposure.
we all always hear about a skills gap. I hear conflicting viewpoints about that. Some people talk about the skills gap. Other people talk about, Catherine mentioned, the flat wages of the middle class over the last couple decades. Household incomes have not risen to keep pace with inflation. How real is the skills gap, and how much does the wage level for manufacturers need to pick up the pace?
I guess I'll chime in. The skills gap is real. I mean, we certainly need more STEM education in our primary schools. We need more engineering majors and less philosophy majors in the universities. But
you mean that liberal arts or degree or some damn thing,
right,
is the video?
Yeah, something like that. But we, just from a Husco perspective, we don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about it. We spend more time just figuring out how do we get the best employees trained the way we need them in the door. And I mean, we do lots of work with WCTC and other community colleges. We've got great training and internship programs. So I don't want to minimize the skills gap. It's there, but I think a lot of companies, I'm sure most of the folks in this room, it's more about finding the creative solutions to how do you get the specific skills and the specific training that you need in your four walls.
Joe's here from Waukesha Technical College. Are things turning? Are things getting better as far as creating a pipeline of talent at all?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think they were really bad for us. I mean, we've always been pretty proactive about developing a pipeline of talent, and we do a lot of work with interns and co-ops, mostly in college, but we do some high school students as well, and that's been one of our primary sources of talent. How do you train somebody better? How do you get to know them better than having them work for you for 3 months or 6 months or a year while they're going to school? So we've, through things like that, we've been able to keep our pipeline pretty full.
Catherine, you have a thought?
Yeah, so I agree. There's absolutely a skills gap, and we find it when we're recruiting for our engineering, our maintenance positions. Those are great areas for people to go in. And I think it's important, though, to note that the skills gap doesn't just affect our companies, and we do notice a problem getting enough skilled people in the door. It affects all the people who come in the door who aren't qualified for the jobs that we have. So all the unemployed people that want jobs and they can't match what we're looking for. So it's a problem not only for the industry but also just for our population, which then leads to, as I said, the pricing pressure as people's own standard of living is not reaching up to the growth expectations that we need to grow our respective businesses.
I think there really is a skills gap, but there's also an ambition and a drive gap, which I think is important to talk about too. The way we talk about STEM is usually you need to get a college education, you need to major in science in college, and it's all focused, it seems, heavily anyway, when you hear politicians talk about our economy on software and high-tech industry type jobs. And there's been an attack on manufacturing companies, not so much here in Wisconsin, but in other parts of the country. There's just, for a generation, there's been attack because of the environment and other issues, and it's not that popular for the best and the brightest students to think about going into manufacturing. In our company, we have great skill, plenty of people to do the actual skill jobs, but to be the leaders of the line, to want to graduate their career and hopefully compete to run manufacturing someday, we end up having to take people mostly out of accounting and other non-manufacturing related skills and train them in manufacturing. What I'd much rather do is have a whole lineup of strong performers who come out of college eager to build a career and maybe run the company someday with operations research, with more manufacturing type of backgrounds. And there just aren't that many of them out there because of the way we talk about the need to go to college and to get into other parts of the country. And the last thing I want to say, piggybacks a little on what Frank said, is our politicians need to understand that the problem with our middle class in this country is not enough manufacturing jobs. That is how we're going to build a great middle class, sustain a great middle class in this country, is to be strong in manufacturing. And they need to help us a lot more than they do. Tax policy, which you're going to get to, and Frank alluded to, is one of the big things they need to do.
I'd just like to say, we can talk about the skills gap and say, woe is us. But the real question is, what are we going to do about it? And just like you've done, we've done a lot with the intern and co-op programs, and we've brought in some incredibly bright kids. They've not only learned, but they've contributed a lot. And so at that level, there is opportunity, and we just need to go out and cultivate that. On the other side, when you look at the people on the shop floor, we tried an experiment last year where we said, do they really have ambition? Do they really want to work harder? Do they want to advance? Do they want to keep their jobs? And we brought in some technical instructors, and we said, anybody who wants to can sign up. And I think it was an 8-week course where people would come in for 4 hours on a Saturday morning on their own time. These are union employees, not get paid, but they would be instructed in some math skills and other skills. We had 10% of our workforce sign up for it. So there are people out there who want to take their skills and grow them and develop them. We need to figure out some more creative ways to encourage that.
That 10%, was that a good number or a disappointing number? Or?
That blew me away. 10% of the workforce.
In a good way?
In a good way. To have them devote Saturday mornings for 8 weeks told me that we've got some people who are interested, not only in their careers, but in the company and advancement and all of that. To me, that was incredibly encouraging.
Jerry Genduza, who just sold his company, MTech, at Future 50, talked about the importance of hiring entrepreneurial employees who think like entrepreneurs, who take ownership, and then empowering them to make a difference at their company. Does that speak to any of you as far as what your experience has been for your company's success?
Certainly, you want your employees to be empowered to make a change. I've talked about, we are looking at controlling our costs, and we have to do that not by having 3 people in procurement do a better job on large supply contracts. That's only one piece of it. What we've done over the past couple of years is dramatically improve our waste. So we have less waste dramatically than we did a couple of years ago, and you had to change the behavior of over 300 people doing their jobs differently every day. So it makes a difference, a kind of employees that you have. And even though I wouldn't say it's entrepreneurial of an individual employee that speaks to lower the waste levels, it is a certain involvement in the job. And then at higher levels in the organization, you do want that entrepreneurial attitude, so that they're always looking for ways to improve the company.
Austin?
Sure. There's nothing I spend more time on than people and culture. And I'm sure everybody up on this panel would agree with me that success in manufacturing companies is not about buildings, it's not about balance sheets, it's about the human capital that you build in your organizations. And if you haven't looked at it, there's a presentation by Reed Hastings from Netflix. It's like a 50-page PowerPoint deck, but it's a great perspective on how a high-tech company thinks about building company culture, and it's something that we've used to model a lot of the things we do at Husco.
Frank, did you have something?
Well, sometimes it's a little challenging. I know in the automotive business, we weren't looking to be entrepreneurial. We were looking to be very structured, because if you don't do something right, all of a sudden you got a problem on 1 million cars, and that's usually not good. So basically, it's taken a while, a couple of years, to try and change a culture where we're really trying to create complementary businesses. And I think that brings a whole level of excitement and energy to the whole rest of the organization. So I think you got to do it. It's the way when we look at the younger employees, they want to try some new things. They want to be challenged, And you don't do that by just going through the normal channels. You got to bring some new life into it.
While we're focusing on our people, my friend Linda Kodrowski, many of you know her from the Paranet Group, came out with a white paper this week that's noted that for the first time in our nation's history, we have a 4-generational workforce: traditionals, boomers, Gen X, and millennials. I wonder if each of you could share a thought about how that dynamic is playing out at your companies and how you're managing that.
I think Frank just hit on it directly, which is the younger the employee, the more likely it is that they are not used to a rank type setup. They're not looking to report to somebody who reports to somebody who reports to somebody else. They don't think in organizational boxes. They think in relationship groups, more in circles. So we like to talk about our company organizational structure as a series, as one entire partnership that's made up of several overlapping partnerships, and that there are all these circles of involvement, and you really need to make sure that everybody has a chance to contribute ideas, to understand what the whole picture is and how they fit in, and
are those circles,
play their roles.
Is that an advantageous thing or a challenge?
Oh, I think it's a very advantageous thing. We get a lot of our best ideas coming out, especially when it comes to product development. I mean, if you want to know what millennials are wanting to wear on the weekend, the best way for me to find out, since they don't invite me to their parties, is to ask somebody who goes. So
I have my own thoughts about why that generation does want to be included in a group and longs for that. And if you step back and think of it, they're on their smartphones. They each live their own realities, and they're searching for the communal experience of enjoying that with each other and sharing that with each other. Do any of the rest of you have any thoughts on the 4-generational workforce?
Maybe it's where I fall in the demographic scale, but I don't really buy the lumping people by demographics. I think it's maybe some helpful insights there, but I think technology has certainly shifted the way we engage in the workplace, right? It's shifted how we interact with other employees, where we can work from, how we do our work. But I think employees of every demographic, they want to know that you care about them. They want to know that you understand what their personal issues are, and 2 50-year-olds might have more different issues than a 50-year-old and a 20-year-old. It's just, investing to really understand what's going on in the person's life, and being committed to giving them the best career that you can possibly give them wherever they are in the walk.
How bullish or not bullish are you on that youngest generation? What do they have going for them generally that you see as makes you optimistic about them, and what do they have going for them that maybe it might be a liability, generally speaking?
I think they're much more open to change because they've had so much of it during their lives, and they're just used to the idea that things change quickly. And I don't think the baby boom grew up that way. Things didn't change that way through the 1970s for most of the baby boom. So I think they've got a tremendous amount of creativity, a lot of energy for trying to control the world and accepting change. And I also think they are much more focused on altruistic values. The book, Looking Out for Number One, was written during the baby boom generation, and I don't think that book would get written today by the millennial generation. So I do actually subscribe to cultural trends that are driven by, the way people are brought up and in the period of time they're brought up in. And I think it's been quite different for my kids than it was for me, and certainly quite different for me than it was for my parents' generation.
Catherine, you have any thoughts about all this?
We're not seeing a big impact from different generations in our workforce. It hasn't changed how we do business at this point in time.
Okay. I want to circle back to what Frank touched on earlier about public policy. We've heard a lot lately about corporate tax inversions, U.S.-based companies moving their headquarters overseas to avoid having to pay any U.S. taxes, and then they're selling their goods to the wealth that is the United States, the consumers in the United States, and not paying a cent of taxes. There's a dozen ways to ask this question, but I'll just ask you, what do you think about that, and what should or shouldn't be done to change that from a public policy standpoint?
You know, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. I'd flip that question. I'd say, what in the world is wrong with our tax policy that U.S. companies are having to go through all these acrobatics and invert overseas to try to escape the highest corporate taxes that exist in the world? I think you said it earlier. There's all sorts of elements to this tax code, whether it's repatriating foreign earnings or just the base corporate tax level, that create all these perverse incentives. And I have a hard time faulting companies who are trying to play by the rules and maximize the value for their shareholders. I think it calls us to introspect more on what our policies are.
I can do everything I want in terms of talking about service and support and all that, but still people are looking at price. Now, if my competitors have a 10 or 15 or 20% cost advantage because they're not paying the same level of taxes, that means I'm going to lose more jobs, more business, which means I'm going to earn less money, which means I'm going to pay Uncle Sam even less, and we get into a death spiral. And so I think we have to shift it away from the greed idea to what can give us a level playing field so that we can be competitive. And then I think we've got something that makes some sense.
I think Frank said also earlier, but what the two of them just said is 100% accurate, I think, and I would agree with. But what Frank said earlier is the point about having money kept outside the U.S. because of the double taxation means that money gets invested in other countries. Bringing it back in allows it to be invested here. And there are many large companies that have billions of dollars overseas that they will not bring back to the United States because of the double taxation. And they don't just leave it out there for nothing. They start to invest it in other parts of the world. And that plays into our economic base here significantly. And we need to wake up to that.
In our conversations ahead of this event, Paul, you made mention to the value of the Made in the USA brand, the fluctuating value of that brand in an era when so much outsourcing is done and the supply chain can be so diverse in terms of geographic parameters. What is the Made in the USA brand? What's the health of the Made in the USA brand, and is there still value in it?
There's I think there's more value in it today than there has been for maybe 30 or 40 years. We've just done a new study about Made in USA, and we asked a large number of potential customers, what they think about Made in the USA. What's the first thing that comes to their mind? And it is again what it once was long ago, which is, or not that long ago, but too long ago. It's high quality. That's the first thing they think about when they think Made in USA. And there was a period of time when people worried about the quality of manufacturing in the United States, but now it's back to being very high quality. So that's very important. One of the points I made to you, Steve, in an email, though, is that with global sourcing being what it is, it's hard to live up to the FTC's definition of what Made in USA really is. You'll note in the bottom of our shoes, anyway, that it says Made in USA of imported materials. There are other shoe companies that don't put that disclaimer underneath of imported materials, but should be, because we know where they get their soles and their heels and their upper leathers as well. And in order to meet the requirements, New Balance, which is a running shoe company, decided to take it upon themselves to define Made in USA as 70% of the componentry and cost structure of the shoe would be good enough for being Made in USA. That's not quite what the FTC says, and they got their hand slapped for that. So, other countries have much looser definitions of what made in their country is. And, the essence of Made in USA isn't necessarily where the heel bottom comes from. And whatever the corresponding thing might be. It's where's that shoe handcrafted? Where are the people working hard on making that product? And in Italy, they get the benefit for saying made in Italy, full stop. Here we have to say made in USA of imported materials. And that seems to be a degradation compared to made in Italy for people. And we're doing ourselves a disservice by being tougher in that definition than in other places.
Catherine, the Made in the USA brand certainly is important in the food industry and in the pet food industry, isn't it, relative to, say, food from China?
Yeah, there have been some quality issues from some global production, so that's made its way through the social media, and therefore Made in the USA can matter to people. We don't see that in our business. Our products are not branded out to the consumer as Made in the USA, but they're sold in the USA to U.S. restaurants and food service establishments. So there's not a lot of call right now to import our food products from outside the USA because it would be too expensive from transportation costs.
I'd like to touch on robotics. Where are each of your companies at in terms of the use of robotics, and where are you headed?
Our company in food is food manufacturing, and we're actually a very high-tech manufacturer, so people are often really surprised to go through what they think of a dairy food facility, that they're going to see a lot of making of food, and what they really see is a high-tech manufacturing facility. So robotics have been very important to us in automating our facility and driving our costs down so that we can be competitive. So if you came in our plant, you would see a facility with a great number of robotics. Makes a big difference.
Anyone else?
Sure. I mean, for us, automation is all about quality much more than any sort of labor savings. So the level of automation we use is dependent on the volume of a specific product that we make. So we have some products we make 10 a year of. Those aren't very automated production processes. We have other products we make 2.5 million a year. Those are very highly automated. But again, the automation is really about making sure that not a single bad part gets to our customer, much more than trying to minimize the labor content that we have.
Frank?
I'd agree with Austin. The robotics are getting cheaper. They're getting easier to program. So we're finding more and more ways to use them. Some of it is labor savings. A lot of it is quality control. And so I think there's just going to be more and more of that. And I think I sit on the board of a company, Banner, in Germantown. It's all they do is automation equipment, and all they're doing is integrating robots into assembly processes. And actually, that's where there's some opportunity. Strattec moved our assembly operations to Mexico 25, 30 years ago because of the labor rate differential. As we get more and more robotics and more automated assembly, flexible automated assembly, there's opportunity to move that back from low labor cost countries to higher labor cost countries because the focus really is then on quality.
Paul, your people are still sewing your shoes by hand.
Yeah, the only thing we have close to robotics is we have bought a couple laser leather cutters now.
Okay.
So we still do laser cut leather the way we have for many years, where we use a pneumatic press and a die to cut out the leather, but we're doing more and more on these laser cutters. It's not so much about labor savings, it's about flexibility in how many products we offer and how quickly we can come to market with a new product if we think it's on the trends and we'd like to be out in a hurry. The advantage of being here in the U.S. is that we're able to do that within 2 weeks. If we see a product that we like in the marketplace that's similar to something that we could do, we can be out with that in 2 weeks, which an overseas manufacturer could never come up with.
We all know about the concept of lean manufacturing, and certainly any company that has made it through the Great Recession has embraced that concept. What's the next great thing about manufacturing? What's the next lean manufacturing? 5 years from now, what are we going to be hearing about? What's that next buzzword or the thing that you got to be doing if you're going to survive? Do we know yet? Crickets.
I think you're going to see a lot more, not so much in manufacturing, but on distribution and the costs of distribution, the cost of the consumption of energy that goes into moving products all around the world. I think people care a lot more about that. So I think that'll benefit American manufacturing, since we are the largest economy in the world. The cost of distribution is going up, and I think people are caring more about that. You see that in the food industry quite a bit with the whole locally grown trends in food. I think you'll see that much more as people become more aware of the pollution that comes from distribution going all around the world as well.
Sustainability?
Yes.
I think tied into that, you really need to look at speed to market, and I think the more flexibility we have in our manufacturing processes, the data that we can use, and modify our manufacturing processes quickly, as Paul just described, as getting a new design out in a couple of weeks, is incredibly important. Tied in with that, I think you're going to, I know at our company, for a long time we looked at buying something or making something here or buying it from overseas, and that was too simplistic. You really have to look at landed cost and all of the transportation costs, the extra inventory you have to carry, what happens if there's a quality issue or a design change, and how much do you lose when you're starting to pay premium freight to move it from China to here. So I think there's going to be more sophisticated analysis on make versus buy, and more localization of manufacturing as a result of that.
I'd like for you to tell us what are the advantages and disadvantages of being based in Wisconsin and doing business in Wisconsin. What are our strengths and what are our weaknesses that could be shored up from a public policy standpoint?
So we've been in Wisconsin for 120 years, so haven't experienced doing business elsewhere, but the things that we like about Wisconsin is particularly the attitude of the workforce. We have a phenomenal group of people who work at our company, and it's really informs the culture that you're able to create. So we think that's the best part of being here. What we believe needs to happen from a public policy standpoint is the focus on the education system to address the skills gap that we said earlier. That's going to be common around the country, but it's a real opportunity for a state like Wisconsin to be in a leadership position and attract more companies in, for example, our food industry by having the workforce that we need.
I'd echo that. I mean, I think the problem with our education system here in Wisconsin and around the country is that it's so bimodal. I mean, on the one hand, it's a real competitive advantage for us to be able to hire the quality of engineers that we can hire here in Milwaukee. I mean, we have about 400 engineers worldwide, and I think we get the very best and brightest here in Milwaukee. We've got great universities, kids with great culture that have mechanical backgrounds, and whether it's growing up on farms or tinkering and with engines. I mean, we love that. But, on the other hand, particularly in urban centers, particularly in Milwaukee, you look at the product of the education system and what's coming out, and it's not fit product for our employees. I mean, we can't hire the vast majority of folks that are getting churned out by the public education system in Milwaukee. And, that's a real tragedy, and, it gets into kind of a bigger issue where, manufacturing and industry used to be centered in urban hubs, and it's gone further out to suburbs and more rural areas because of bad public policy, and I don't know what the chicken and the egg was, but because of education systems that are broken, where we can no longer hire the sort of employees we need close to big urban centers.
Frank?
I think we need to look at, you can look at it at the glass half full or half empty. We read about articles that say, gee, Wisconsin is at risk because manufacturing hasn't been growing, and we have such a dependence on manufacturing, so we're at great risk. I think we need to look at it the other way. We're really a center of excellence, and when you look at, if you really define a center of excellence, it's amazing how people line up behind it and you get motion in the right direction. So for example, it wasn't too many years ago that people talked about water for the brewing industry and sailboats and a few other things. But when we defined our industry here as a water technology center of excellence, all of a sudden, all sorts of things have been happening. People have been attracted here. We've been able to market it here. We're getting to be known globally about a center of excellence, and that feeds on itself. What we need to be talking about is Wisconsin being a center of excellence in manufacturing generally, and that's an easy, we should be bragging about it. We're not used to bragging much in Wisconsin. We should be bragging about that and focusing on that, and that's going to attract more and more policy, more and more people, more and more educational efforts. It'll help all the way around.
Paul, do you have a thought to add on that?
I'd say the same thing, except add that since I traveled the country an awful lot in my previous career as an investment banker, it's easy to live in a place and not realize what you have. This state has the best manufacturing climate in the country, and a lot of the problems that other states are facing and how to build manufacturing companies, and by that I mean culture. It's not necessarily the best climate when it comes to tax policy or other things, but the culture is so strong here. People do go into manufacturing because they think it's a great career here. Companies are valued here for their manufacturing presence and for the jobs that they create in manufacturing at a level that just doesn't happen in most states around the country. So that's the best thing about being here is we're part of this center of excellence, and it just keeps building upon itself.
With that, we'll take questions from the audience for our panel. Anyone want to break the ice?
Question for Frank on your Saturday morning education. What was the age of the participants? Was it across the board, or did it skew younger or older?
It probably skewed a little bit older, but I can't really give you a good answer to that because our workforce is a little bit older. And so, they were looking, but it wasn't totally that. So I think it was reasonably spread given the demographics of our workforce. And so I think they're all looking to move that forward. And we're looking for ways to take the skills of the older employees and how do we keep them around even on a part-time basis to both educate and bring in that knowledge base that isn't always written down and share it with other employees.
Yeah, anybody investing in or early adopting in 3D additive manufacturing?
3D printing?
Additive manufacturing? Yeah.
Any of you
Yeah.
jumping on that?
Yeah, so we use it. To date, we've used it primarily for kind of conceptual prototypes. So, it's really easy to get something that you can hold in your hand today, something that you could only look at a screen yesterday. Just in the last year, we've started to actually use metal 3D printing for functional prototypes, which is pretty incredible considering that, we make high-pressure vessels. So that's, that is a really interesting technology that I think is a long way from being a high-volume serial production sort of technology, but I think it's going to revolutionize our speed, the speed at which we can bring new technologies to market and functionally test them.
Are we ever going to get to the point where people are going to be 3D printing stuff that you people are manufacturing now? Is that concerning you at all? Not in our lifetimes?
Well, not what we're manufacturing. I know that. But just like Austin, we're using it for prototypes, and I think where people will be using it, not for high volume, but when they're customizing product, when you want to have a slightly different feature on one product versus another, it's a great opportunity. So I'd expect to see more in that area.
Yes, the forum you touched on company culture and younger employees wanting to try new things and experience new opportunities. What kind of tactics or advice can the forum you give on younger business leaders such as myself on improving company culture, improving the morale within the organization?
The question is how to improve the morale of an organization. How important is that for you, and what are some of your best practices for making that work?
We do a number of things. Basically, I think it's important that people are involved and they see the big picture. So we have regular company meetings where all questions are answered and are fair. I have monthly luncheons in my office with a random group of people, both salaried and hourly, and we just talk about our families, we talk about our hobbies, and we talk about business issues, and I think that helps a lot. I get a lot of positive feedback because I take the time every day when somebody has an anniversary with the company to just go out and shake their hand and thank them. And I often get some very interesting ideas and comments back. It's a little thing, but people want to know that they're important. They want to get the big picture and see where they fit in and how they can contribute. And I think that's just human nature, and it goes, as Austin was saying, it goes across all of these age groups. You got to be part of the team, and if you give people the opportunity to be part of the team, they'll generally gravitate toward that.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I pick up on one thing you said, which is how do you change culture? I think it's really hard to change culture. In fact, I think the key to building a successful culture is more around really reflecting on what are the positive attributes of the culture that you do have and how do you build on those, and less around trying to do something totally different, because changing culture is something that's tough to do. The second thing I'd say is that the number one thing I tell my young managers about culture is that's your job, right? I mean, it is your job to build the culture that we as an executive and leadership team have defined that we want to see at Husco on your teams and between the teams you interact with. And I think that's, it's empowering for somebody to hear that I expect you to be the person that's out helping to create the sort of culture that we want at Husco.
We have time for one or two more. Bill?
Describe your best practices in product development and shrinking lead time to market innovation.
Best practices for new product development and innovation.
So our best practices involve an increased level of integration with our customer. So before our product development was more disconnected with the customer who was going to buy it. So we made something and then thought if we make it, then they will come and buy it. Whereas now we're getting out front and having a more integrated relationship with the customer where we're responding to the needs, and it also means taking more risk in product development, which is to say the customers might have 4 things they're interested in, and we work with them on all 4 of those, not all of which will end up being a product that we're actually producing. So again, the best practice being be out front with your customer and take some risk on what you're developing so that you have a good pipeline.
Paul?
I'd say a couple of things that have been very helpful just in the last several months. One is getting a lot more input from the market, from our store managers, from customers directly on what they'd like to see us do. Another is split our product development process into really new thinking, completely new concepts of shoes, new sole, new look, everything brand new. That's a separate activity for us now. And the idea of just thinking about, well, let's do a wingtip, but maybe this time we'll use a different color leather. We'll change the finishing on it. Try to be bringing something to market that's a new look in the finishing. We'll do that with a team that isn't as focused on CAD design, isn't doing the 3D printouts of sole molds, and we'll just focus on the quick changes that we can do in developing what looks like a brand new product, but is really just a variation on our long-standing themes. And then the third thing is to test, which is something we didn't used to do. We used to bring a shoe out at the beginning of a season and just say, you know, we're committed to this style, and then if it didn't work, we'd end up with all this clearance product. And if it doesn't sell that well at full price, it doesn't sell that well at clearance prices either, and you just keep driving it down and down. If you're wrong, you're still wrong, even if it's 50% off. So, yeah, 50% off doesn't change it being wrong. So what we do now is we'll test. We'll use web. We call them web gems. We'll put them out and playing off the sports analogy of the web gems and see what kind of reaction we get from an email and then made to order, or we'll put them in a handful of our stores and see how they do there, and then in the next season we'll bring them out more broadly. So testing is a huge thing.
With that, we're going to wrap up this part of the program. How about a hand for our panelists?